Hello, my name is Malia Garcia, and I'm an asset manager in the Office of Housing Finance and Sustainability within the Division of Housing. Today, I'm going to be going over how to use the new Division of Housing unit tracking sheet. The spreadsheet was designed so that management's able to track the assistance of DOH units when they float from one to another. The housing asset management team strongly encourages utilizing this sheet in order to track a project's DOH assisted units at the time of contract closeout and then throughout the period of affordability, as well as those that are already in their long-term period of affordability. This will help with monitoring as staff turns over and also ensure that DOH assisted units remain consistent over time and don't change unless it's for the appropriate reason. This tracking sheet will be required and requested for all long-term monitoring as well. So with this sheet, you can elect to use either option 1 or option 2, whichever you prefer, and I'm going to go through both of those. And there's also examples for each of them as well that you can refer back to for visual clarification and guidance. So starting with option 1, this is going to be done by each calendar year. So when you're using this option, you'll enter the calendar year up here in this box, and then you'll track those units from January 1st through December 31st of that year. And then for subsequent years, you're going to right-click down here on option 1 and click the duplicate button, and that will duplicate that tab, and you can rename those for each year, 2025, 26, so on. And this option also can be updated either once a year as tenants are recertifying or ongoing, whichever management prefers. We always encourage, though, trying to complete it throughout the year as much as possible, just due to staff turnover, and just want to stay up to date with it. All right, so under unit size and AMI, this is where you'll enter the bedroom size and area median income designation for that DOH assisted unit. You can find this information in your unit mix on your use covenant. For funding source, you'll enter the type of DOH funds that were provided, such as home, HDF, HGG, etc. Next, you'll enter that apartment number for that unit, and then you'll enter the head of household's full name under this section. For the assistance floated question, so this is going to be where you're going to use the drop-down menu to make a selection based on the circumstance for that year. I'm going to go through each of these. So you would select yes if the assistance was floated that year to a comparable unit. And just a reminder that assistance can only be floated to comparable units with the same type of features. In progress would be selected if the assistance needs to be floated, but there's not an alternate unit available yet or identified, or if you did identify a replacement unit, but their recertification hasn't happened. Because as a reminder, you can only redesignate to an existing unit at the complex at their replacement unit's recertification, or you could redesignate to a new move-in as well. Not applicable, this would be selected if it didn't need to be, the assistance didn't need to be floated that year because the tenant still meets all the requirements and qualifications at the recert. For a reason, you again will select from the drop-down menu and one of those reasons listed. These should really be the only reasons why you would need to float the assistance. So if there's a reason that's not listed, maybe reconsider why that assistance is being floated, or reach out to an asset manager for further guidance. I'm going to go over each of these. So the first option, over the income limit, that's when the household's income exceeds the appropriate income limits that were in effect at the time of their recertification. Make sure you refer to DOH's website for the appropriate income limits. Next, for moved out, that's pretty self-explanatory, but that would be if the tenant vacated the unit because their lease ended or for other reasons, they're no longer living there. AMI designation change is when a household no longer qualifies at their current AMI designation, such as 30 or 50%, but they do qualify at a higher or lower AMI level. That household is then changed to that new AMI designation and can keep their provided that the new AMI designation conforms to the unit mix. And if it doesn't conform to the unit mix, then the DOH assistance will need to be floated. Over the rent limit, this is when a household's gross rent charged exceeds the appropriate rent limit in effect for that funding source. So with this, if say a rent overcharge is identified from a prior year's recertification, then that household, or if they have a voucher, the voucher administrator, they'll need to be refunded for those overcharged amounts. But if the overcharge is identified when the tenant's annual certification is still in effect, then management can float the assistance to an eligible household and unit size, of course. So just again, refer to DOH's website for current rent limits and pay close attention to those effective dates so you can avoid having rent overcharges. Full-time student would be selected if a member of the household's student status changes and they do not meet any of the exclusions of the Section 8 student rule. So therefore, that assistance would need to be floated. Refer to this tab here at the bottom, definition of terms. That goes over the full-time student exclusions as well as other information about all of these options. Lawful presence only applies to projects that are federally funded, such as home, HDF, CDBG, etc., but that it doesn't apply to state funds like HDG. So you would select this option if a member of the household is added and they don't have legal residency. Just a reminder that all household members in federal programs, federal sources, they have to have signed affidavits of legal residency at either their move-in or when they become DOH assisted, and those need to be present in their tenant files. Lastly, you would select tenant meets all qualifications, still meets all qualifications, if they're still eligible for the assistance that year and it doesn't need to be floated. So again, you would kind of over here push select not applicable, and then the reason would be because tenant still meets all qualifications. Additional comments is where you'll provide any additional information regarding the circumstances for why the unit is being floated. We recommend using specific details and dates and just being as specific as possible for any pertinent information. In the date replace section, this is where you'll enter the date the assistance was floated. So this could either be the date of the replacement unit's recertification or the move-in date of that replacement unit, if it's a new move-in. So if it's an existing unit that's being used as a replacement unit, this will now be considered their initial eligibility determination for DOH assistance, but will remain the same date as their original, recertification. So if they've lived there for a few years, they have the same recertification date at their current recert, now going to have DOH assistance. That's their initial eligibility determination. We recommend selecting the funding source now on that tick for that year. And just a reminder that it's now their initial eligibility determination, all the same documents and regulations for a move-in are required. So needing source documents, stuff like that. All right, and then for new unit number, that's just where you'll enter the new unit's apartment number, the new unit's head of household's full name. And for period of out of compliance, this is the period between the original unit's recert date and the replacement unit's recertification, or as I said, what is called now their initial eligibility determination. If the replacement unit is a new tenant moving into the property for the first time, then that date replaced would be their new tenant's move-in date. But again, the DOH assistance can only be floated at the time of the replacement unit's recertification. So if those two units have the original unit and the replacement unit have different recert dates, the project will just be out of compliance for the time period between that original unit, the recert date, and the replacement unit's recert date, now known as their initial eligibility determination. So just a reminder that, a property is temporarily out of compliance during that period between the unit redesignations. So now we're going to go through some examples from option 1. So as you can see here, we entered in this example 2023. We'll start with a 1-bed at 50. It's a home unit. Their information, the assistance was floated. It was because they were over the income limit at their December 1st, 2022 recert. Then it was refloated on January 1st, 2023, so it took about a month. Their new units information, they were out of compliance for that month of December until it could be floated. And then now we have some examples of AMI designation change. So we have a 1-bed at 30 here. This tenant, the assistance was floated, and it was an AMI designation change because they were over in the income limit for a 30% AMI unit at their recert, but they qualify for a 40% AMI unit. So this tenant underneath them, that's a 1-bed at 40% in the unit mix, Charlie, they were designated as a 40%, but we're going to switch them. And now they're designated as a 30% because we wanted to keep the assistance with Katniss over here. So we'll just switch that information between those two tenants on those lines. And now we're going to talk about a full-time student. It's a 2-bedroom HTF unit. The assistance was floated because they were a full-time student at their September 23 recert. They became a full-time student. Took a few months to be floated, so that happened on December 1st. So they were temporarily out of compliance between September and December until that assistance could be floated to this tenant here. Then this one's pretty self-explanatory still with they just happened to move out on this date, the end of May. It was replaced on July 1st with this tenant. They were out of compliance for that month of June. Next, we have an example of lawful presence. This tenant's partner was added to the lease at their May 1st recert. But they don't qualify with lawful presence regulations. So therefore, the assistance needed to be floated. The assistance was floated on June 1st to this tenant, so they were temporarily out of compliance for that month of May. This is an example here with this tenant of in progress. You've identified that the assistance needs to be floated, but there's not an alternate unit available at that time that you could float to. We understand that these things come up. Sometimes there's not an eligible tenant moving in or an existing tenant's recertification date coming up. So at that time, you'll just be temporarily out of compliance, and you'll identify that here from that tenant's recert to present, and just keeping that on your radar so you know to try to find someone as soon as possible to float that assistance to. And then we have over here, we have this tenant. You would select not applicable because they still meet all the qualifications that year. So you don't need to float the assistance. And then the last option or example we have is the assistants need to be floated because they were over the rent limit. It was determined at the 2023 on-site monitoring that the gross rent was over the home rent limit. So the assistants need to be floated. This occurred at their 6/1/2023 recert. Since it was still in effect that year, we were able to float the assistance to avoid that overcharge. And that took a few months, and we floated to this person. So from June 1st to September 1st, they were temporarily out of compliance until it was floated. And then this next tab down here is option 1 instructions. This just goes over how to complete the option 1, like I just went over, but this has more in-depth information about that and just something to refer back to. So for option 2, this option allows you to track floated units on an as-needed basis. So there'll be one table per DOH assisted unit in your unit mix. Here we have six tables already in here for you, but if you need to add additional tables, you would just select this and copy it, and then you can add it down here to the existing tab, or you could create new tabs like I mentioned earlier. For this, you're going to be tracking the assistance per the unit in the unit mix. So here you'll enter the unit size, AMI level, the funding source, and then here's where you'll enter the original qualifying unit. So if you're starting from contract closeout, you would enter that original qualifying unit, or starting now, you could enter just the current assisted units number there. So you'd enter that in that section. Then you'll enter the head of household's name again, the full name, the reasons. Again, as I mentioned, I went through all of those. As you'll see here, though, the tenant still meets all qualifications option is not available. And that's because you would be filling this out when the assistance has floated. So as it's needed to float. In option one, it's by the calendar year. Maybe the assistance didn't need to float that year. That's why you would have that option. But in this one, it's going to you would track it as it needed to be floated. So that's not going to apply here. Same with the additional comments, being as detailed on as possible, the dates replaced, when that unit was floated, that period of out of compliance like we talked about. Now this is where it will be a little bit different from option one. You're going to enter the replacement units number down here after you followed through the first unit. So you would just enter that unit number once you've floated it, leave it there until you needed to float the assistance from that unit. And so then you would follow the exact same process through all of these, continuing on, and you can add additional rows as the time goes on and needs to be floated. All right, so now we're going to go through some examples from option two. Here you would enter, again, this is a 1-bedroom at 30% AMI. The funding source was HTF. This unit over here, say you only had 2 units in your unit mix, 1-bedroom at 50%, funding source HTF. We're going to have similar examples for those reasons here, but you'll start with unit 254, the tenant's name, the reason why it was floated, information regarding that. Again, they were over the income limit. It was floated on December 1st. They were out of compliance from October through December. Similar unit, and then actually, excuse me, so once you've floated the assistance and they became DOH assisted on this date, you would go ahead and enter that replacement units number right there. So 310, then 310 needed to be floated. So then you would fill this out again. Full-time student rule here. Replacement unit for this one was unit 118. And then they needed the assistance floated because of lawful presence. And then you would enter that the replacement unit here was 247. So here I want to show you about the AMI designation change. So this tenant was over income for a 30% AMI unit at their May 1st recert, but they qualify for a 50% unit. So they're going to be switched with unit 426, which is over here. This is a 50%. We do the same thing. This tenant's information, AMI designation change. They are now designated as a 30% unit and will be switched with 247. And then there are some other examples over here. Same situations over the rent limit, moved out, and just following the same path as that one. And then we have the next tab is option 2 instructions. So just how to complete these instructions here for how to complete option 2. And then we have the definition of terms. This just goes into more in depth about what each of these terms that we're using means. It goes over the student section, exceptions, like I mentioned. And I want to show you as well that we have some snippets here of the unit mix that's on your beneficiary rent use covenant. So just showing you that this is similar examples. So if you had home units there, the bedroom size is the AMI level. If you have two different DOH funding sources, that's what it would look like here. Bedroom sizes, AMI levels. So we hope this spreadsheet will be helpful. And as always, just reach out to an asset manager for any guidance or questions. We'd be more than happy to help you. There's also always helpful resources on DOH's website if you have any questions about what these mean, over income limits, what to do, stuff like that. But thank you so much for watching.